All right, everybody, thanks for joining the meeting tonight. We are streaming this on Facebook Live. So be aware there will be a little bit of a time delay between what folks are seeing on Facebook Live versus what's happening in the Zoom, but we're going to go ahead and get started and answer as many questions as we can tonight. I'm John Livingston. I'm the Public Information Officer for Colorado Parks and Wildlife in the Southwest region. I will be moderating the meeting tonight. This is the Southwest Region Sportsperson's Caucus. We are very happy to have everyone here tonight for some updates on the issues that are important to hunters and anglers across our region. Meeting will be recorded on our Facebook Live. It will be available to watch anytime after this meeting concludes, and we're going to work to get it posted to YouTube as well. Feel free to leave any comments and questions in the chat, but please make sure you stay on topic. We are going to make our best effort to answer as many of those questions tonight as we can in the 2 hours that we have allotted for this meeting. Questions will be relayed to each panelist following the conclusion of their presentations. All right, with that, I want to turn it over first to our two Southwest Region Caucus representatives, Mia Anstein and Roger Cesario, for any updates and announcements they may have. Mia, let's go ahead and start with you tonight.
Well, I'm glad that we're finally having a caucus meeting. I'm one of the Southwest Region Caucus members, for anybody who's watching that doesn't know what that is. Roger and I are representatives that try to be a voice for you with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and in turn, we try to have our meetings so that we can share information and have Parks and Wildlife give you updates. And hopefully, if you're seeing this, you can reach out to us in the future and let us know your thoughts on items. I personally do try to attend commission meetings, and I go to events at the state capitol and so forth to try to be a good representative for sportsmen and anglers, but primarily on the wildlife side. So if you have any questions, please reach out.
All right, and Roger, if you want to go ahead. Hey, Roger, sorry, you're still on mute. Let me unmute you real quick.
I think I'm set now, John.
Yep, there you go.
Roger Cesario from Crested Butte, Southwest Caucus member for the Sportsman's Roundtable. I'm happy that we're having a meeting as well, and like to hear from anyone at any time issues regarding Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Thanks, Roger. Next, we'll introduce our regional manager here in the Southwest region, Corey Chick. Corey, yeah, welcome and thanks for being on the meeting.
Appreciate it, John, and welcome everyone. A wise person once told me to never miss a chance to be quiet, so I'll hurry, get through mine, and then we'll get to the information that y'all are really wanting to hear about. I did want to, and I know John already introduced himself, but John Livingston's our new public information officer to the Southwest region. He's doing a great job putting this together, working for our team over here in the Southwest. So wanted to welcome you, John. Also, Jamin Grigg, our new Southwest senior terrestrial biologist. It's good to have you on board, and looking forward to a good meeting. And last, Mia and Roger, thanks for attending. Yeah, finally found a date, and we're making it work. So yeah, it's good to be here. Wish we were in person, but it's good to be here. Back to you, John.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, I believe with that, we can roll into our terrestrial updates. Jamin Grigg, our senior terrestrial biologist here in the Southwest region, has put together a couple of presentations regarding elk and mountain lion studies here on the Western Slope. Jamin, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. And thanks, Corey, for the introduction. Yeah, excited to talk to everybody today. As Corey mentioned, I'm Jamin Grigg. I'm the new Southwest Region Senior Wildlife Biologist here. I was previously the biologist in Salida for 12 years, and then biologist in Craig for 2 years before that. But I grew up in the Southwest region, and I'm excited to be back. So yeah, excited to share some updates on different projects that we're working on here in the Southwest region that our biologists are involved with. And we've got a number of different projects going on. We just completed several radio collaring operations, radio collaring deer, putting GPS collars out on deer and elk in the Gunnison Basin area, putting GPS collars out on deer on the Uncompahgre Plateau west of Montrose, radio collaring some bighorn sheep for some movement and distribution studies. And we actually just completed about 220 hours of helicopter surveys across the region as well, to sample big game populations, deer and elk and bighorn sheep populations across the Southwest region. So our biologists and field staff, DWM, spent about 220 hours in the helicopter during the months of December and January, and collecting age and sex ratio data on all of our herds, and then all of that gets compiled and put into population models, and that's what produces our population estimates that we then use to set hunting licenses with and manage populations with. So lots of different things going on. We just completed a sandhill crane capture outside of Montrose, actually outside of Delta, putting GPS transmitters on sandhill cranes to monitor their movements and migration patterns. So lots of cool things going on, different projects. There's a couple projects in particular that I wanted to share with all of you here this evening, and I've got a couple short PowerPoints on that. The first one is an elk GPS collar study going on in GMU 521 north and east of Paonia in the Grand Mesa elk herd. And then the second presentation that I'll give is about our West Slope mountain lion density study, where we're GPS collaring mountain lions and coming up with density estimates on mountain lions across the West Slope. So with that, I will share my screen here. And present some slides here for you. John, is that working there?
Yeah, you got it, Jamin.
Okay. So we've got a number of radio collaring projects going on. Again, across the region, we've been GPS radio collaring elk in the Gunnison Basin for several years now, putting GPS transmitters on elk. And anytime we're collecting data, it always gives us a lot of neat information, but also always provides new questions. And so we're constantly trying to improve our data collection and learn more about these herds so that we can better manage them. So anyway, starting this winter, we began a project designed to evaluate elk use of GMU 521, where we're putting GPS collars out on a number of animals in this GMU to evaluate movements and habitat use in this area. GMU 521 is part of the E14 DAU, which is the Grand Mesa elk herd. I think many of you are probably familiar with our DAUs, but essentially a DAU is a geographic area that's designed to incorporate the seasonal movements of our individual herds as best as we can, and kind of outline those with geographic boundaries. So it should include most of the summer and winter movement patterns, summer and winter range of that particular herd. So again, 521 is in E14. It's on the Grand Mesa, east of Grand Junction, north of Montrose, north of Paonia, that country. It's again surrounded by some of the other various GMUs up on the Grand Mesa, GMUs 41, 42, 52, 411, 421, and 521. So there's been, I would say, a lot of interest in recent years regarding elk movements in and out of GMU 521 and throughout the E14 DAU as a whole. There's been concern that maybe elk are moving out of this GMU, this particular GMU, before the hunting seasons start, possibly moving either into other GMUs in the DAU or even moving into neighboring DAUs. Through some of the Gunnison Basin radio collaring that we've done, we've seen movements back and forth between E14 and E5. We've also seen movements back and forth between E15 and E14. E15 is just to the east of E14. So we're just trying to get a better idea of how these elk are using the landscape seasonally, how they're migrating, how hunting pressure is influencing those movements and those migration patterns. And then all of this, again, informs our management actions so we can hopefully improve our management, our hunting license distribution, and elk distribution across the landscape. All of this information also improves our ability to comment on land use, energy development, different land use activities that are going on as well. So starting actually last month in January, we began putting GPS radio collars out on elk in GMU 521. We want to be able to radio collar elk in GMU 521 both in the winter and the summer to see where these animals are going during different seasons and throughout the year. So last month we were able to get a helicopter in the air, a helicopter capture company who specializes in capturing wildlife and radio collaring wildlife from the helicopter. They actually dart these animals out of the helicopter and allow us to get a good distribution of collars across the herd. So last month we were able to work with our capture company and GPS radio collared 15 cows and 15 bulls in GMU 521. And this effort's really being led by Evan Phillips, who is our biologist, one of our biologists out of Montrose, as well as the DWMs and the field staff out of the Montrose office and the Gunnison office. So when I'm saying we, that's really who I'm referring to, along with our capture company. So anyway, we now have 30 elk GPS radio collared in GMU 521, and we'll be monitoring those movements and that data here in the coming months. And then this upcoming summer of 2022 here, we will be doing a summer capture where we'll be GPS radio collaring 20 cows and 20 bulls on summer range. And this will just help us to get a really solid sample of animals collared throughout the GMU, and then we can monitor their movements during both the summer and winter months and see how they're moving in and out of the GMU and potentially the DAU. These GPS radio collars collect locations every 4 hours over basically what we're hoping for is about a 4-year study period. So we'll have quite a number of elk radio collared in this area and be collecting data on them for at least a 4-year period, hopefully. So again, just really excited about this project. The capture operation went really well, and we're starting to already see a lot of really cool data coming in from these various animals that are radio collared, and looking forward to learning more about this project, learning more about how these elk are moving, how they're using the landscape, how they're interacting with other DAUs, Gunnison Basin, E15, different DAUs. So thanks to all the field staff involved with this project. And with that, I will move on to the next presentation here.
Real quick, Jamin, we had a couple questions come in on the elk subject. If we could maybe address a few of those real quick.
Sure.
Alex asked if we are monitoring how elk are responding to recreational trail use in Southwest Colorado. I know we've got a presentation coming later tonight on regional partnerships and how we're addressing an increase in recreation. But how does the magnitude and measured impact and movement compared to that measured for hunting pressure?
Sure, you bet. Great question. Yeah, appreciate that. We are evaluating elk responses to recreation pressure, not specifically in the Southwest region right now, although indirectly we kind of are. We do directly have a research project underway in the Steamboat area, actually designed to evaluate elk recreation pressure or elk recreational impacts on elk distribution and elk populations up in the Steamboat area. And hopefully that'll be applicable across a large portion of the state. As John mentioned, the regional partnerships that we'll be hearing about later in this program are hoping to address some of that as well. And then certainly we're always able to use any of our GPS radio collar to evaluate elk use around roads and trails and around whether it's recreational pressure, hunting pressure, different types of human related pressures that they might face. So that's certainly a huge issue. I think we know that increasing recreation pressure is having impacts on our wildlife populations, and we are, I think, working diligently to study some of those questions and try to provide some answers. So we've got the Steamboat study. We're also monitoring elk calf survival in a number of different areas around the state. One of those is on the Uncompahgre Plateau west of Montrose. So it's certainly something we are evaluating in various places, but good question, and certainly a big issue. Anything else, John, or should I move on to?
I think we're good. I think some of these other questions may come up when we talk about license allocations later tonight. So let's go ahead and get into the mountain lion density information.
Okay, great. I will try to pull up that presentation here and let's see if I can share my screen here. Is that working?
We got your desktop, but yeah, you should be good.
Okay. How's that looking?
Looks great.
Okay. So yeah, the next project I wanted to highlight here this evening is a study to monitor mountain lion densities across the western slope. We're now in the second year of this project, and the goal of this project is to GPS radio collar a sample of mountain lions across various study areas on the west slope of Colorado, moving this project around from study area to study area on different years, and then using radio collars and then some camera traps, some game cameras. We're able to get lions on camera and come up with what's called a mark recite density estimate on mountain lions. So talk a little bit about how that works. Through our West Slope Lion Management Plan, we have a goal of better estimating lion populations across the West Slope of Colorado. Mountain lions and most predator species are difficult species to get accurate population estimates on. These are somewhat rare species. They're secretive. We can't just go out and survey them with a helicopter the way we do with a lot of our ungulate populations. They're just much more difficult animals to collect accurate data on. And so it takes different techniques to try to come up with population estimates. So what we're doing again in the second year of this study. This year, the study is taking place in the Gunnison Basin. It's being led by Mark Vieira, who is our statewide carnivore biologist, as well as Kevin Blecka, who is our Gunnison-based biologist. Brandon Diamond, who you'll hear from here in a bit, who's the area manager there, as well as the various DWMs and field staff there. But anyway, this year it's in Gunnison. Last year it was in Middle Park. And what we're doing is trying to catch and radio collar, GPS radio collar, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 adult mountain lions in each of our study areas. Examine the movements and survival of these animals, and then we're able to use these collared lions and remote cameras to get, again, what's called a mark recapture or mark recite density estimate of lions across the area. So how do we go about catching mountain lions? How do we go about getting them on camera and getting these density estimates? We have a couple different ways of catching mountain lions and getting GPS radio collars on them. One way is to tree them using hounds, get them up in a tree using hounds. So we'll go out on the landscape, driving roads following a snowstorm. And if we can find fresh tracks in the snow, we will then be able to put dogs on the track, put hounds on the track, and the hounds are able to get these cats up in a tree. So anytime we have good snow on the landscape, we've got a number of field staff who will be out looking for tracks, and then if we find a fresh track, we'll be running that cat and getting that animal up in a tree. Once the animal's up in a tree, we're able to use a tranquilizer dart to sedate the animal, and then as the animal's falling asleep, we actually climb up the tree and we're able to get hobbles and get the animal secured before it falls asleep, and then we can lower it out of the tree and radio collar the lion that way, and then we reverse the tranquilizer and send the lion out on its way. The second way that we catch mountain lions and radio collar them is usually using live traps, cage traps. So we actually all winter long will be collecting road-killed deer, basically just driving the highways and driving roads and collecting road-killed deer, and using these roadkills as a bait. Across the landscape, we'll take these animals out, these road-killed animals out into the landscape in areas that we believe to be good lion habitat, areas where a lion is likely to find them, and then we'll place the roadkill out there. We'll place a camera on the roadkill. A lion then finds the roadkill and claims it. They will cache it or kind of bury it and claim it just as if it was an animal that they had killed. And then because we have a camera on the bait, we're able to tell, what kind of lion or what kind of animal we have on the bait. We can then set a trap, a live trap. The lion comes back then after dark and goes into the trap to retrieve the road-killed animal. The door then shuts behind it. We're right there monitoring the trap, and we can quickly and easily, safely then tranquilize the animal in the trap and pull it out and radio collar it. Here's a few more pictures of lions in traps and then us processing them. So we'll tranquilize the lion in the trap, pull it out of the trap, and then radio collar it. We'll put some ear tags in the ears. We collect some biological data, take some blood samples, collect the age and sex of the animal, that sort of thing. So in the lower left-hand corner there, you can see a lion that has one of our road-killed deer cached right there, and he's come in and he's feeding on that deer, and then we can set the trap off of that. So once we have our sample of 25 lions radio collared across the landscape, we then have a camera grid, a remote camera grid that we set up across the landscape, where we're placing somewhere in the neighborhood, varying depending on study area, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 cameras that we place across the landscape in lion habitat. That remote camera has a predator call associated with it that sounds like a deer in distress or a rabbit in distress. That call goes off at night when it's dark for a 12-week period. And that call will bring lions into the camera. And then based on the number of lions that we get on camera and the percentage of them that are radio collared, if you do that over a long enough period, it will produce a population estimate, actually a fairly precise population estimate. And give us a density estimate. So if we do this across a number of study areas across the West Slope, we then come up with some fairly good population estimates across the West Slope, which can help us with management. So in this photo here, in that tree is one of the calls. That's one of the predator calls. You can see the lions have come into it. That's a family group. It's a mom and 2 subadult kittens. They hear that call going off in the tree. We're getting photos of them from the camera that's placed on the opposite tree across from them. They'll do stuff like jump up and try to get the calls. It's kind of entertaining to watch, fun to watch. Lion will rip a call out of a tree sometimes, play around with it, and then eventually it just realizes it's not food and it'll get bored and it'll leave. So that's essentially what we're doing, and so we're actively radio collaring lions this winter in the Gunnison Basin, and then once we get our sample radio collared next year, we'll be placing the cameras out on the landscape and the calls out on the landscape for a 12-week period to get our mark resite population estimate. So hopefully that gives some idea of a couple of the projects we're working on here in the Southwest region, along with various other projects, but wanted to give kind of those 2 updates and be happy to answer any questions or have any discussion that folks would be interested in.
Yeah, Jamin, one question that came in from Pat Dorsey is asking if we're including urban and or rural residential areas in the study areas, or if it's focusing more on remote areas.
Hey, Pat, good question. Yeah, I would say both. We're certainly incorporating urban areas as well. Basically, any lion that is in the DAU. So any of the urban areas that are in the DAU that we're evaluating that year, I would say we're radio collaring lions both in and around towns as well as out in more remote parts of the landscape. So we're trying to get a representative sample, across the DAU, which certainly in some areas includes urban landscapes as well. And in fact, we're actually actively, so in the Gunnison area this winter, we're actually actively encouraging residents and members of the public, if they find a freshly killed deer in their yard or a fresh lion kill in their yard or on their property, give us a call. We'll come put a camera on that kill and hopefully are able to trap that animal and radio collar it and monitor it. So.
Very good, Jamin. I think that takes care of some of the questions that we've seen on the Facebook stream. I just wanted to open it up since we do have a little bit extra time here and see if Mia or Roger had any more questions regarding either of your 2 studies that you just presented on, or terrestrial updates in general.
Jamin, that's fascinating stuff. Thank you for the presentation. I think both of those were great. My question is, are you in the Durango office then, being the senior biologist?
I am. Yeah, Roger, I am. I'm based out of the Durango office. Yep.
And what's your relationship or chain of command with Evan Phillips? How he's in the Montrose office?
Right.
How's that?
Right. Yep. So we have 7 biologists and a pilot throughout the Southwest region that I supervise. And so we've got a biologist in the Durango office, 2 biologists in the Montrose office, as well as a habitat coordinator there, 2 biologists in the Gunnison office, and then 1 biologist in the San Luis Valley office, the Monte Vista office, as well as our pilot that all fall under the terrestrial program for the Southwest region. So I would be working with Evan as Evan's supervisor, but the biologists are the ones doing most of the work on these projects and deserve most of the credit, along with the DWMs and field staff.
Great, thanks.
So, Jamin, which units did you say the elk study is going on in?
It's primarily focused in GMU 521.
Okay. Will there be a need further south in the future, or is that the main focus for now?
Well, right now we're just collaring elk for this study in 521, but we do have a number of radio collars deployed in neighboring DAUs, the Gunnison Basin, E15, different places, and a lot of those collaring studies were actually, I would say, what precipitated this study, or those are kind of the studies that led into this study. We have seen some movements from those collars across GMU boundaries, across DAU boundaries. There's been a lot of local concern, specifically, I think, about 521 and elk moving in and out of that GMU and their distribution, especially during the hunting seasons and things, and maybe a decline somewhat in that population in the last 10 or so years. So I would say that this project is largely focused on 521 and then the E14 DAU as a whole, but it ties in very closely to other collaring projects going on in E5, E15. And I might see if Brandon wants to add anything to that. Brandon's very involved with this project as well and very familiar with it.
And part of what I'm curious about is there any tracking going on with the elk as they go in and out of New Mexico, or is that something that we have much data on?
I see. Sorry, Mia, I understand your question better now. We do have elk collared in the San Juan Basin. So here in the Durango area, we do have deer and elk GPS radio collared in the San Juan Basin and are collecting movement data on them, and are seeing a lot of movement into the tribal areas, the Southern Ute tribal areas, a little bit into New Mexico as well. We know in places like E32 in the San Luis Valley, and Rick can speak more to this, but a number of our border GMUs, we know we have movement back and forth across state lines, and we are evaluating that as much as we can.
Thank you.
Mia, and I'll add a little bit of that. That's one of the great partnerships that we have with the tribes on, I think a lot of that work they're even doing on their side. So great partnership. So
Thank
good
you.
question. Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Thanks, Jamin. I appreciate your presentations this evening. I know you're going to be involved in a couple more of the topics as we get going, but we'll give you a little breather here, and we'll jump over to the aquatic side of life with senior aquatic biologist John Alves. John, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
You got that?
Yeah, we got you, John.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Alves. I'm a senior aquatic biologist, Southwest Region station here in Durango. I have aquatic team of 5 biologists. There's aquatic biologists in each one of the major drainages and 1 conservation biologist out of Gunnison. We do a wide variety of aquatic monitoring and projects, and some are sports fish management, others are native fish and amphibian conservation, boreal toads, Rio Grande native fish. We have 2 species of cutthroat in the region, the Rio Grande and the Colorado River, plus this new strain of cutthroat called San Juan cutthroat that's specific to the San Juan drainage. And then there's another lineage of Colorado River cutthroat in our Gunnison and Dolores drainages as well. For tonight, I just wanted to talk about a couple our harvest incentive tournaments that we've been doing for the last few years. Let's see. Do you see my presentation up there, John? Because I'm not seeing where I can get to it.
Yeah, you're good, John.
Not finding where I can change it. Okay, there we go.
If you want to hit from current slide and see if that gets you started.
I think it worked now. You see the second slide?
We do not.
Huh. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I think it's up now. The first topic is our angler harvest incentive tournaments that we've been running for a while, parallel with the Elkhead tournament in the Northwest. We have the I'll provide an update on 2021 Ridgeway tournament for smallmouth bass, and also the Blue Mesa Reservoir Lake Trout tournament. So on the Ridgeway, a little background. Ridgeway Reservoir is located north of the town of Ridgeway on the Ridgeway State Park. In 2013, we documented an illegally introduced smallmouth bass population that was taking over. And it was the concern was that the bass could escape from the reservoir and impact critical habitat for the Colorado River endangered fish downstream below Delta on the Gunnison River. So we took steps to contain the population. One, by Tri-County Water Conservancy District stopped releasing water through their spillway, only through the outlet tube. And they've done that for years. And we just finished, I believe it's real close to being finished, a screen that goes around the outlet of Ridgeway Reservoir to keep fish in so they can't escape. And that'll allow Tri-County to continue to better manage their water through their, by keeping more water in the reservoir and allowing them to use just one. You still have that, John?
Yeah, that's okay, John. I'm going to go ahead and go through your slideshow for you, if that's okay.
Okay. I don't know what happened. Anyways, they're going to be able to better manage their water using the outlet or the spillway. So we looked at several measures in which we could use to control smallmouth bass in the lake. We knew that we can't get rid of them because the lake is too big to treat with rotenone or any other pesticide. And so we decided to use a mechanical removal as our choice to control this. And we wanted to involve the public anglers in this control effort. So we decided to do this, what we're calling it's actually called the Smallmouth Bass Classic. And it's a harvest incentive tournament that we started in 2015 to control smallmouth bass. The way it works is anglers join the tournament, it's free, and for every smallmouth bass they catch, no matter what size, and turn in, dead of course, we take those fish and they get a raffle ticket. And we give prizes out for the most bass caught, the smallest bass, the largest bass, and then we have a raffle, and we usually spend about $10,000 a year on prizes, but that's very helpful for us, so we don't have to be out there doing mechanical removal using nets or electrofishing gear. The tournament has been very successful at reducing the adult population by over 90%. If you go to the next slide, John, it's been well received by the public. This little girl showing a big bass that she caught. That was on one of the earlier tournaments. And then when they bring in their bass, we would measure and take other information that we use to understand the population dynamics of smallmouth bass in the reservoir. Recently with COVID, though, we have gone to using freezers, and all they have to do is drop the fish in a freezer in a bag with their name and their identification as to their participation in the tournament. The chart on the screen right now shows the population estimates over time since 2015. Every year we do a population estimate. We go, Eric Ardunio, the biologist out of Montrose, and our reservoir researcher, Adam Hansen, go out on the reservoir and electrofish and tag fish, smallmouth bass, over 6 inches long. And those are considered adult fish. So we mark them, and then we use a mark recapture equation using the fish turned in as a tournament as the recaptures. That's a lot of information, but anyways, you can see that in 2015, we were up around 3,500 adults, and we've had this over 90% decline in population. Now we're down to less than 500 fish in the lake. So go back to the other slide, please, John. You can see there's a pre-population for every year estimate, and there's a post-population estimate, and that's why there's two columns here. So that's been very successful. Now with the screen in, we could better manage the reservoir. We're gonna discuss whether to continue to do tournaments every year. You get to a point where the population is so low that angler success may be low, and they lose interest, and then it becomes not very useful in controlling the bass. So that's to come. This tournament is usually in July, August, so we've got some time to decide whether we're going to go forward with the tournament this year, or maybe go alternating years. Go ahead, John. The other tournament that we started 2 years ago is the Blue Mesa Reservoir Lake Trout Harvest Incentive Tournament. And so just as a background, lake trout and kokanee salmon inhabit Blue Mesa Reservoir just west of Gunnison, Colorado, and east of Montrose. It's very popular for kokanee as well as quality and record-breaking lake trout. In 2009, we determined that the lake trout abundance was out of balance with the kokanee, and we were at risk of losing the kokanee salmon fishery, which provides a lion's share of kokanee salmon eggs for our kokanee program throughout the state. And so we needed to do something immediately, and we decided to embark on a mechanical removal project using gill nets. So in the fall of 2009 and all the way up through 2018, we were removing gill nets. We had we were removing lake trout with gill nets, concentrating on the smaller size lake trout because it was determined that there were so many small fish that they were the ones that that was that cohort that was providing the most predation on kokanee salmon. And it was costing us somewhere around $40,000 a year to do a mechanical removal with a CPW staff. So in 2020, we decided to implement a lake trout harvest incentive tournament, very similar to the Ridgeway tournament, with the focus on removing lake trout less than 24 inches. And like the Ridgeway tournament, we provided cash prizes for most fish caught. Tag fish, they get an automatic prize for that. It's all cash prizes. And then we have a raffle, and it can be as much as $10,000 or $11,000 that's far less than what it was costing us. So, next slide, please. So this is looks like I didn't include the dates on it. This is a graph showing abundance of lake trout at Blue Mesa Reservoir, and you can see that the white column is for lake trout over 10 inches. The brown or the darker columns are lake trout over 14 inches. And the first set is 2011, and the last set is 2021. Doesn't matter really what the numbers are, but you can see there's been a steady decline in lake trout numbers, especially those over 14 inches, over the time from 2011 through 2021. And so with this information this year, we decided that we would take a break this year and do population estimates every year. You could see in 2011, the spike at about 400 millimeters. We had this big cohort of smaller fish, less than 24 inches, which is around 600 millimeters, and wanted to knock that back. You can see over time, and by 2021, we put a lot of pressure on that cohort while still maintaining lake trout of quality size, even record-breaking sizes in the lake. So this is a whole process for us to start to manage the reservoir for both kokanee and lake trout, bring it into more of a management that we want. The last thing I got is there's been an issue recently about fishing with spawn sacks, and it's a technique that's often used by ice anglers to catch salmon species, especially large fish. Spawn sack is a mesh bag filled with unfertilized eggs of various salmonid species, as you can see in the pictures here. And the angler would attach a small hook to the egg sac and then usually drop it straight down through the ice. They don't do well if you cast it out. Next slide, please. So spawn sacks are used on the West Coast for salmon and steelhead. Commercial outfits will take the salmon eggs and cure them and put them into stacks. Very common out there. The issue is whether the eggs or other portions of game fish are legal to fish with. And right now, salmonids are not on the list of legal fish to use parts, whether it's eggs or other portions of the body. Some of the methods to obtain salmonids, like I said, is you can buy them commercially. You can collect unfertilized eggs from legally harvested salmonid species. So somebody catches a kokanee salmon and cuts it open and takes the eggs and makes spawning sacks out of it. The other way that we've noticed people doing it is they collect eggs from legally caught fish, then they manually strip the unfertilized eggs from the female salmonids, then release the fish back into the water. We're looking at that because there may be some impacts to the fishery from the angler actually spawning the fish out, collecting the eggs, and then releasing it back in the river. With kokanee, it's not as big a deal because they die after spawning, but we don't know what all the impacts are to the fishery. So now we're taking comment on this and considering alternatives to legalize the method of spawn sacks for fishing, especially for salmonid species. So if you have, are you familiar with this or would like to comment on it, I'll try to post my email in the chat, and then you can send an email to with what you think, any comments you might have on this. And that's it, John.
Very good, John. Yeah, I want to put it out briefly to our caucus reps and see if they have any questions on the aquatic side for John.
I would say, John, thanks for that presentation. That's very interesting. I'm going to research the spawn sack. I've got some friends that spend a lot of time on the ice, and I want to get their opinion, and certainly will provide you with a comment.
Great, appreciate that.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, very good. With that, we will jump over to Brandon Diamond. Brandon, if you want to share your screen, he's going to present along maybe with some comments from Jamin Grigg here about license allocations and preference points. I know this was a topic that's been discussed at all of our regional caucus meetings so far this year. I know it's one of the bigger topics around the state, so we can jump into this and then maybe have some more time for questions at the end of this presentation.
Thank you, John. This worked once. There we go. How's that?
That's great. That's perfect. Thanks, Brandon.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Mia and Roger, for your continued service to the sports people of Southwest Colorado and Colorado. Welcome, everybody. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a work group that I've been a part of really since last June or so. And it's been called a few different names, but essentially the purpose of the group is to discuss license distribution and allocation. And we'll get into more of what that means as we move along. Jamin is also on that work group. You can see the work group members listed on the slide here. I give full credit to Danielle Eisenhart. She's our license section manager, and she built this presentation, and I thought it was spot on, and hopefully you all will find it informative. So to put the cart a little bit before the horse, I'll just jump right to the timeline here, and some of you may have seen this already. Essentially, what we're hoping for in this process is to potentially reach some draft alternatives by this fall. If you start at the beginning there, phase one, we have already collected a tremendous amount of public input on this through the surveys that were available last fall. A lot of you probably participated in that. We have conducted staff focus groups, and we are currently planning for our public focus group efforts on this. Concurrently, we also have our big game attitude survey pending. And some of you may have participated in the big game attitude survey, the BGAS, the last time we did it. I believe it was 2014, so it's been a while. These processes are independent, but they're very much related to one another. And so I'll just throw out a plug right now. If you do happen to get a big game attitude survey in the mail in the near future, please take the time to fill it out because it's really important. For that process, there's going to be 6,000 randomly selected hunters from Colorado and non-residents. The 6,000 will also be stratified by manner of take. So we're going to be sending surveys, solicitations out to archery hunters, muzzleloader hunters, and rifle hunters, but 6,000 folks. So keep your ear to the ground. If you get one, please take the time to do it. But back to license distribution and allocation. Our work group right now is working on organizing and orchestrating some public focus groups across the Western Slope. Some of you that filled out the surveys earlier in the year, or last year, I guess now, you indicated that you would be willing to participate in a focus group. So we're drawing from that list to build our groups. That's going to happen probably in the next month or so. So it's imminent at this point. Following that, following the big game attitude survey going out, we plan on having additional workshops and stakeholder meetings. We haven't fleshed that out yet, so there'll be more details on that to come. But ultimately, the goal is to get something before our leadership team, our director, and the Wildlife Commission by this fall. These are issues, and I know most folks on tonight probably are really familiar with these issues. We've been talking about them for years, many years now, and finally taking a closer look on it. So it's a great opportunity moving forward. And I misspoke a second ago. There will be focus groups in all 4 regions in Colorado. But of course, the one that's closest to home will be in the Southwest for most of you. All right, so what is our work group looking at? There's essentially 4 topics that we're really taking a deep dive into. This is not a final list. There may be something else that comes up, but these are the ones we're trying to focus on for this process. So one of them is allocation. And when most of us talk about allocation, we talk about the number of licenses that go to residents versus non-residents. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Preference points are a topic of discussion and debate and collaboration. They have been for years. You know, that's simply how our preference point system currently works. And how points are gained and used. The weighted draw is of big significance to a lot of our hunters. The weighted draw is used for sheep, goat, and moose currently, and it's a little bit different than the traditional preference point system. But when you get a weighted point, there's some advantage to it mathematically in your statistical probability of drawing a license. And we'll talk more about that in a second. And then we are discussing it in great detail over the counter opportunities in Colorado. And there has been some question, is this model still working for us? And should we look at something different? And again, we'll get into all of these details moving forward here in a second. So, and again, I can't repeat it enough. All of this is very much draft. So there's no decisions that have been made yet. We don't have any hard and fast proposals that are going to our leadership team or our commission. Everything is still on the table for the most part, but we're starting to get a feel for where folks' interests lie. And in terms of allocation, a lot of you, experienced hunters in Colorado understand these regulations and these policies. But in terms of allocation, sheep, goat, and moose fall into a category in that 10% of the licenses and no more go to non-residents. The flip side of that coin is that 90% of our sheep, goat, and moose licenses go to residents. Deer, elk, bear, and pronghorn are a little bit different, and there's several tiers of license allocation for those species. One is the hybrid draw, and the current hybrid draw model that Colorado uses for hunt codes that take 10 or more preference points based on a running average from 07 through 09, that 3-year running average. 20% of those licenses are in a pot set aside from the regular draw, where if people have 5 or more preference points, they can apply for that 20% of the licenses. So it's sort of a set aside for high demand hunting licenses, essentially. And hybrid draws, we use that term. That's how Colorado's hybrid draw looks. It looks a little bit different in some other states across the United States and across the Western US, but that's how our model currently works. And then for specifically deer and elk, we have two tiers for allocation. So for hunt codes that require fewer than 6 resident preference points based on the 3-year running average from 2007 to 2009, the allocation is split. 65% of those licenses go to residents, 35% of those licenses go to non-residents. And that's assuming the demand is there. For hunt codes that take 6 or more licenses, so for the hunt codes that really have a lot of interest and for our hunts that have a really high demand relative to the numbers of licenses available, 80% of those licenses go to residents, while 20% of the licenses go to non-residents. So Colorado currently has several different tiers of allocation, but at the end of the day, the question is, how many licenses should go to residents versus non-residents? And those are the kinds of conversations that we're having. So, and again, this is just a few ways you could potentially modify the allocation regulations in Colorado. Some folks have asked us to update the years that we calculate those averages on. So right now, the average is calculated based on 2007, 2008, and 2009. Should we go to 21, 20, and 19 and keep it up to date? We can also talk about changing the preference point levels for those different tiers, where should it be 6 or more, or 6 or less, or should it be something different? And those are the conversations we can have moving forward. The question has been raised, should we have multiple tiers of allocation, or should we just have one allocation percentage levels for residents and non-residents that spans across all hunt codes and all species? And so those are the conversations that we're having, and I know a lot of you folks are involved and have been thinking about such things for many years. Preference points. Preference point discussions have resulted in a lot of interesting conversations. There's a lot to talk about there. In Colorado, as most of you know, if you apply on a first choice for a hunting license for deer, elk, bear, pronghorn, turkey, and you're unsuccessful, you get a preference point. And so you build preference points over time if demand exceeds supply. And then once you draw a license, all of your preference points are voided and you're set back to 0, and you can start again. Preference points are not used for second choices, third choices, fourth choices, or in the secondary draw. And preference points are not used if you buy an over-the-counter license or a reissue license at this point. So that's our current system that you're all familiar with. And one of the something that has led to these conversations and the development of this work group and the public engagement that's ongoing is this thing we call preference point creep. And most of you are familiar with this, especially if you've been applying for limited licenses for a long time in Colorado. Danielle put a couple of examples here, none of which, maybe 851, no, 851 is not in the Southwest region, but preference point creep, if you look at these different examples, so for this EE 85101A hunt code, which is an archery elk license, it took 8 points to draw in 2015, and it took 11 points to draw in 2021. So it's sort of that increasing demand for licenses over time, resulting in a higher preference point requirement. We had over 700,000 applicants for limited licenses this year, according to Danielle. And so we have a substantial number of hunters vying for a limited number of licenses. And preference point creep can not only be the result of just increased demand by hunters, but other things happen there in nature and in the environment. Perhaps we have a serious winter, which results in higher than average mortality, which for parks and wildlife managers, we are then compelled to reduce the number of licenses available because our herds have been impacted. And so we can create preference point creep just based on annual variation in our big game population performance. So there's lots of things that influence preference point creep, but it's a real thing that a lot of folks are talking about these days. So what are some of the potential ideas to address point creep? And this goes to the broader preference point issue. And some of this comes down to, we certainly want predictability and fairness and opportunity in these systems. Some of this is figuring out ways for people to burn preference points more frequently, so we don't have this giant reserve of points out there. Some of it is sort of questioning whether our current system is adequate and meeting most people's desires. And so as we've discussed, some old, some new have come up issue-wise. Point banking has been discussed, and I'm sure some of you remember the point banking regulations that we had in place for a little while a few years ago. That's where you can use a portion of your points to draw a hunt code or a hunt that requires fewer points than you have. So a person might have 10 preference points. Maybe they want to draw a 3 preference point hunt. You could burn 3 preference points, maybe have a 1-point tax, I think is how we did it last time. And you would use 4 of your 10 preference points, but retain 6 of them. So preference point banking has been in discussion. A split draw and an increased hybrid draw. So what we're talking about there is, are there potential ways to create a different hybrid draw model? It doesn't necessarily have to be like the one we have now. It could be that 75% of the licenses go to the high preference point holder, 25% of the licenses go in a straight lottery, so you don't need preference points, and that would be a hybrid. There's 2 things going on there at once. So different ways to implement a hybrid draw system have been discussed, and we have been looking and researching other Western states as well, because there's some interesting things that other Western states do that's different from us. Folks have talked about the use of preference points to purchase leftovers or reissues. Folks are on the reissue front. Sometimes folks get a 20-point hunting license in the reissue process, and they can save their preference points. There have been folks that have asked us, well, can they use some of the preference points to get those really highly desirable licenses? So that's been discussed. Purge points sooner than 10 years for non-licensed purchasers. So what that's referring to is that if a person, resident or non-resident, if you purchase a bunch of or you get a bunch of preference points in the early course of your life, perhaps, and then you take a 5, 10, 15-year hiatus from hunting in Colorado, and you're just sitting on preference points without buying an annual license of any kind. The question is, should your points be purged on some sort of cycle so that you're not just sitting on points out there in the wind and potentially contributing to preference point creep when the mood suits you. Folks have asked about averaging preference points on group applications. I know other Western states do that, or some other Western states do, so that's been raised. Set a limit on the number of preference points one can accrue, and or get rid of the preference point system entirely. I think it's Idaho. Idaho has a straight lottery system for hunting licenses without a preference point system. Don't quote me on that, but I'm 99% certain that's how they run their draw. So that option's out there. And of course, status quo is also out there. And I should have pointed that out earlier. The status quo would always be an option at the end of the day in terms of alternatives. So the weighted draw is a little bit more complicated than the straight up preference point system. And right now, again, we use it for moose, sheep, and goat. And essentially how that draw works is for the first 3 years, a hunter is applying for a sheep, goat, or moose license, and they're getting a preference point. And when you hit year 4, then you start applying for a weighted preference point. And right now in Colorado, we do charge for preference points for sheep, goat, and moose, straight up preference points and weighted points. But the way a weighted preference point works, and some of the other folks in the room fact check me here, but basically once you start building weighted points, when you send in your hunting license, application, it's assigned a random number. And so what happens in the weighted system drawing is that application number, once it's randomly changed and some things happen, it's divided by the number of weighted preference points you have. And that's important because the license is going to the lowest number at the end of all of those processes. So if you have 10 weighted points, your application number is divided by 10. And so theoretically, that would give you a mathematical advantage to get to that low application number, and you would have a higher probability of drawing the license. So the weighted point system is what it is now. Once you draw a license, your preference points and your weighted points are zeroed out, and you would have the ability to start over, depending on some other regulations. And of course, for sheep, goat, and moose, 2nd through 4th choices, there's no preference points being used, but that's fairly uncommon for those species. And so how could we potentially modify the weighted draw system? Some states use a bonus point system rather than a weighted point system. And that's important because they are different. A bonus point system, and I've never, I do apply in one Western state that uses bonus system. It's basically each bonus point you get, it puts your name in the hat that many times, real simplistically. So if you have 10 bonus points, your name's in the hat 10 times versus someone that has 3 bonus points, their name's in the hat only 3 times. And so that would again give you a mathematical advantage of some magnitude going into the draw. Another potential option would be to square weighted points. So again, the more weighted points you have, the better the lower your number ends up at the end of the day. So squaring it would give you another mathematical advantage to that, potentially. Some states only allow, and this is more specific to sheep, goat, and moose licenses in general, but some states only allow their hunters to apply for one of those big 3 species each year. So in Colorado, you can apply for sheep, goat, and moose. In some states, you have to pick. This year, am I going to apply for moose, or am I going to do sheep, or am I going to do goat? I can't do all 3. So those are regulations that other states have implemented. And then, it's easy to apply in Colorado with the use of a credit card, but we don't charge you for the whole price of the license up front. And some states, I think, do. And so that would be an option also. And that would potentially limit the playing field in terms of the number of people participating, just because that's a lot of money to put out up front. And then over-the-counter limitations in licensing. Danielle has this broken down into 4 different categories. And so the first one is essentially our over-the-counter elk hunting opportunities in Colorado, which are generally archery and 2nd and 3rd rifle seasons. There's also the plains rifle elk seasons, which most of us probably haven't participated in, but they are OTC. Whitetail only late rifle hunts are apparently OTC. Some bear licenses are now essentially over the counter, unlimited. And then we still have some units where there's either sex archery licenses available over the counter. The reason that first bullet is highlighted is because that is really the impetus for discussing over the counter management in Colorado. And a lot of it comes down to crowding and complaints about lack of success in a crowded hunting environment. And can we sustain what we're doing currently? So this is kind of a neat, she's got 2, Danielle prepared 2 of these going back to the early 2000s. This is all over-the-counter elk licenses, and MOT is manner of take. So this would include rifle and archery for the most part. And I don't know what was going on there in 05, 06. I would just kind of ignore that. They're outliers. There's got to be some data explanation for that. But you can kind of see the trends over time. The green bars are non-residents and the blue bars are residents. And you can kind of see how it's ebbed and flowed over time. If you look at it comprehensively across all manners of take, it's stayed relatively stable over time, but still a lot of interest in our over-the-counter licenses. When you look at over-the-counter elk archery, though, there's been a substantial increase in interest in these seasons and these over-the-counter licenses. We went to almost 40,000 licenses in 2019. I have the number in front of me. There we go. We went from 26,000 licenses approximately in 2003 to almost 40,000 being sold in 2019. So archery contrasts with the rifle seasons in terms of the popularity and the trends. And one thing I should point out, I apologize, with over-the-counter, when you look at those data, you also have to remember that some, over the last 10, 15 years especially, the data is influenced by some of the units that have gone from over-the-counter to limited. And so we have a number of examples of those types of units across the Southwest region. So that's not really fleshed out there, but that's going on in the background as well. And so in terms of over-the-counter, though, potential modifications or ways to change what we're currently doing that have come up in some of our discussions. And this certainly ties back to allocation in general, but folks have talked about putting a non-resident cap on over-the-counter licenses. And so for residents, over-the-counter would still be over-the-counter unlimited, whereas non-residents would have a cap on the number of licenses that they can purchase. Once those licenses were sold, then that would be closed, and then it would be only residents that could continue to buy over-the-counter licenses. We could replace over-the-counter licenses with over-the-counter with cap licenses. And so for those of you that have never bought an over-the-counter with a cap license, what that means is that instead of just being able to go into Walmart at any time throughout the fall and buy a license, there would be a time when the number of licenses is set ahead of the season. So there's basically a set number, but you don't have to apply for that license. You can come in and you can buy the license first come, first serve until they're gone. We used to have over-the-counter with cap licenses in Game Management Unit 54 in the Gunnison Basin, and folks liked it because there wasn't an application involved. There wasn't a preference point system involved. It was just first come, first serve. And if I wanted that license, I could generally come in and grab it. But there would be a ceiling to it. It wouldn't be unlimited. For archery, there's been conversations about, there's lots of different permutations of changes to the archery licenses. We could make over-the-counter either sex archery licenses completely limited across the state or in different regions, different DAUs, different GMUs. We have been doing some of that over the last 10, 15 years across the West Slope. Let's see, we could, I think we just touched on that one. So archery, there's different things. Folks have thrown out ideas about making bull licenses over the counter, but limiting archery cow licenses. Lots of different things have been discussed in terms of archery, but that discussion has been a hot one, not just for this process and for this group, but for the last few years between CPW and the broader hunting community. And then that last bullet point there, OTC rifle hunts have been in these conversations. Is it time to start looking at a different style of management for over-the-counter rifle hunts as well? And you could go the same route. You could do over-the-counter with caps. You could go total limitations, non-resident versus resident allocation. So all of those things are being discussed and will continue to be discussed, I imagine. So in terms of future opportunities to participate, and if you're not one to get in the fray, you know, in a real formal way, understand that you can always call any one of us and talk about these issues, reach out to your local district wildlife manager, biologist. We're all happy to have these conversations. And if you have a silver bullet for any one of these, we're certainly all ears. But in terms of the formal end, like we talked about with the timeline, the next step is public focus groups. So for those people that we select for those, we'll be reaching out to you in the near future, and hopefully you're still willing to participate in that. Again, fill out the big game attitude survey. You'll see when you get it that there's a lot of questions that are very similar to the kinds of things we just talked about. So that big game attitude survey, I think, turned out really well. It's going to be extremely informative for Parks and Wildlife, and we really need you to take the time to think that one through and fill out and send back to us. Public meetings, if we end up having those across the state, you know, obviously everyone will be welcome. And then the commission meetings are all open to the public. And so there's opportunity to provide comments and testify before our Parks and Wildlife Commission. So there's a lot more to go. This process is certainly not over by any means. So participate, because these are really complicated, challenging issues that we know are going to be highly controversial, and we're going to have some lively discussions about them. But we hope to hit a sweet spot, and the process ends up in a good place where the majority of the people feel like we did a good job. So with that, I'm done, John, and I can try to, with Corey and Jamin's help, we can probably try to answer some questions if folks have them.
Sure. Yeah, we've got one question that we wanted to bring up from Steve that maybe Rick and Jamin can maybe tackle together. But with GMU's 80 and 81 for elk going limited for archery, what will be the proposed quota for those GMUs, if we can answer that?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. I don't know that we can say exactly what that number is going to be right now, but when we were proposing this, we were looking at going back to a sustainable level where before the point of inflection where we had for the number of hunters on the landscape, we were getting good harvest percentages. And at that time, folks seemed to be tolerable. So kind of a median of where we are, where we've been probably in the last 20 years is probably where that number is likely going to end up. The whole point here was not to limit to the degree that we were trying to establish, you know, some level of quality that had nothing to do with it. It was simply trying to reduce those numbers to a point where we had a good experience, and which would be sustainable over time for the number of people on the landscape.
John, I can help out with that one a little bit as well. And it'll probably be in the lines of what Rick's talking about, to looking at, well, I mean, since we've limited licenses, you know, further over in the southwest corner, we had a large influx of hunters that headed over to 80, 81. So I think part of the goal is to somewhat stop the bleeding. So I think we would look at meeting demand, or somewhere between meeting demand and getting back, like Rick's talking about, to a more sustainable level to where it's a quality. Well, I'll say quality. I mean, quality is always, as it relates to archery, quality's in the eye of the bow holder. No pun intended, but I would say we would look at somewhere between there and start the discussions there.
Yeah, I think those are really good answers from Rick and Corey. The only other thing that I would maybe add is just that I think some of these limitations, as both Rick and Corey were alluding to, it's really not so much to limit drastically the number of licenses. It's more to cap this really dramatic increase in participation that we've seen in the last 20 years. You know, we've seen basically an 84% increase in participation in the archery seasons, almost entirely from the over-the-counter archery licenses since 2003. So, you know, if we've got this continually increasing trend. It's more about capping that more so than really limiting opportunity is the only other thing I would add.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. And then, yeah, just wanted to real quick open it up to Mia and Roger to see if they have any more questions on this topic before we shift gears here.
Well, I have questions, Brandon. I know you didn't expect that. You mentioned 700,000 applications for big game licenses. I was curious what was there previously, or what percentage of an increase was that?
I'd have to hit Danielle up, Roger, to get previous year's data. I think she just put that in there just to provide current context. But we can get that information to see how it's changed over time.
Then another one that I'd look for that I don't expect you to have at your fingertips, Brandon, but what was the results of the survey? Compiling that survey that happened last year.
So yeah, it's that's a whole nother presentation, but there were over 10,000 people that responded. I think I mentioned that to you at one point. It was a really robust response. And, it just in a general sense, I would say that the public surveys aligned pretty well with our internal conversations and our internal priorities. And that is preference points and allocation are the two issues that rose to the top. And Jamin, you can add in anything too, if you can recall some highlights for that, but we do have that information summarized. The Northwest region folks summarized all the public input, but it's a presentation in and of itself.
Okay. I want to go through just a few things, and I'll make it quick. And I think this was kind of thinking about coming up later on another topic, but one of the big things, and maybe this works with what you're working on and maybe it doesn't, but one of the big things that I'm concerned about and what I hear about a lot of is the population of Colorado at 5.8 million currently and projected to be at 8.7 million in 27 years of 2050. And how does that work with license allocations? There's an unlimited pressure on a limited resource, more people moving into our state, technological advances with black powder rifles shooting at 250 yards. We just passed a no let-off restriction on bows. Crossbows and archery, I realize that they need a medical excuse, or there might be a different word for that. Later rifle seasons, unlimited licenses, trail cams, e-bikes, all those things above seem fairly unsustainable to me for the future. And, I don't know, Brandon, if we can be looking at 20 years down the road during this process, but I think that's where CPW needs to be.
No, I appreciate it, Roger. And I think this work group we got a great assemblage of CPW folks, and we're getting a lot of public investment in it. And I'm hoping that, the fruits of our labor will be good, and meaningful to sports people across the state. And these are timely discussions. We've been having them for many years, and we're finally taking them on. So we're going to keep working on it. Stay tuned and stay engaged.
All right, thanks.
I think the only thing that Roger didn't mention was the wolves, and as far as something that impacts wildlife, and you obviously are going to have to deal with that, and probably already immediately are dealing with that. But one thing that I don't really have a lot of questions, Brandon. The only thing that I really want to say is that I look forward to giving public input as you guys are taking it. I have applied, as so many thousands of others have as well, to try to be on your working group. And it's bigger than just how many licenses we can allocate. We have to figure out how to sustain the wildlife population ultimately. I'll give up a hunting license if it means we can still have elk on the ground or bighorn sheep, whatever the animal is. But I just hope that other people who are listening hopefully can also take the time to give public comment when you're ready to take it.
Yeah, thanks, Mia. And I think Corey would agree. I mean, to me, there's a real power in the caucus and the regional groups. And I hope that you folks just stay engaged and participate in the process as it moves along, because there's a lot of expertise amongst you. So thank you.
Yeah. And one other thing that I'd like to say is there's so many options you just presented us. And I remember talking to Corey years ago at a commission meeting about how the whole point system works. And I don't even know how he understood it, because it's very complicated. Hopefully whatever happens can be simplified so that it's easier on you guys and easier on us.
Me and I can touch on that one a little bit. I think that was part of the ask, is whatever we do moving forward. It's hard enough to run a draw, much less have to explain how we do it. So I completely agree with you, and I think that's what gave me the gray hair was helping out with that. So no, point heard. Thank you.
All right, very good, everyone. In the interest of time, as we are now a little bit behind schedule, but we are taking comments and questions so we can chip into that slot that we had for the end of this. Let's go ahead with one of our last presentations of the night, just the impacts of increased recreation, how CPW has been addressing that for years and looking to the future through our regional partnerships initiative. Rachel Strala out of Area 18 of Montrose is going to give us a presentation on that topic.
Thanks, John. Had to find my unmute. So you can see my presentation and hopefully you can hear me.
We got you.
All right, very good. Thank you. My name is Rachel Sorella. I'm the Area Wildlife Manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife in Area 18 out of Montrose. So I'm the field level supervisor for the team of 7 district wildlife managers or game wardens. We have 4 property technicians, and then when fully staffed, we have 2 admins that work here in the Montrose Service Center. So we're a really busy office. We interface with our customers a lot, and it's a hopping place to be. In addition to selling licenses and passes, we are in one of the really growing demand and growing recreation and growing conversation areas for this topic about how do we balance recreation and wildlife. What I want to go over is nothing in really specific detail about any studies, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the work that CPW does in the state and things that are that are on the slate and being worked on right now to help us find a better balance. This conversation about balancing rec and wildlife is a tale as old as time. We've been talking about this within Colorado Parks and Wildlife for decades, and we've been advocating for wildlife and for habitat protections, and that need only seems to intensify. Sorry for shuffling slides on you. Now I mean to show this one. These are pictures from the San Juans. We have the northern San Juans in our area, and they are definitely being loved to death in some places. Especially in the last couple of years, we've seen this really tremendous increase in recreation pressure. And I think we can all picture somewhere where we used to go and find solitude that now we're seeing something like on the right where camping has really taken an impact, or you and 12,000 of your closest friends are going to go hike to some alpine lake, and some of these experiences have really changed. This is a function of a lot of things, I think, but we have, as we've talked about multiple times this evening in the different presentations, more people in the state, more people with an interest in the outdoors, either as hunters and fishermen, anglers, or as just folks that love to be outside. And we're also seeing this really steep and quick, really steep interest and increase in the ease of access into the backcountry. So 4-wheel drives, OHVs, side-by-sides, things that we have not seen and not dealt with for decades are now really readily available. So they're increasing the ability for one person to get into the backcountry, and they're also, because they're so widely available, we're seeing more people that are taking advantage. This was a question earlier, but recreation pressure is a year-round thing. Hunting seasons and hunting pressure really is only a few weeks out of our year, a few months when you look at the beginning of the archery season through the end of the late seasons, and that's only a small fraction of the challenges that face wildlife through the year. Recreation's year-round, from over the snow to traveling on dry earth, and it's constant. And it's really important that we as wildlife managers understand what the needs of wildlife are throughout the year, and then can explain and advocate for that and for protection of those really important habitats, so that our wildlife and big game, especially our herds, can be perpetuated into the future. We all know that there's those impacts that we see physically. Places get physically disturbed, vegetation gets trampled, but we're seeing this really this increasing body of work that is showing the reactions of wildlife to recreation disturbance and other disturbances. Bottom right is an elk out of Rocky Mountain National Park, a long-term study there. As Jamin mentioned, we have a lot of these collar studies going on the Uncompahgre here in Area 18 and across the state. But so we always think of studies, we think deer and elk kind of by default, but we also have a study going on up. This picture is sheep from the Desert Bighorn herd S62, and those sheep are currently being studied in a recreation-based study that's ongoing. So really interesting work going on across the state and collaboratively, and we're ending up with this growing body of literature for us to draw conclusions from, and then to evaluate and summarize the findings to make management recommendations and to encourage that those recommendations be applied on the ground. We have a couple of resources that we've put together as a result of that effort. If you go to our CPW webpage, it can be a little tough to navigate. So if you can just go to cpw.state.co.us and search for land use or search for planning trails, you'll come up with either the land use page or this great document that we put out called Planning Trails with Wildlife in Mind. It's a summary document that gives some tools for land managers or grant proposal applicants to use when understanding what are the potential impacts that we want to do, and how do we fulfill this mission of sustainable recreation and also protecting wildlife. So we have these recommendations that we use. We CPW, that your area wildlife manager and their district wildlife managers make every single day, and we're using these tools every day. Again, these are both on our website, and these are some that we have published, but there's a lot of really good resources out there for you. So seeing this in practice, we have worked extensively with our federal land management partners to make recommendations for protection of wildlife habitat during sensitive times of year. On the right, you'll see this BLM map. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's got the orange and the purple. And they have an online mapping tool that shows the closures, and it explains that they're wildlife closures. So these, for example, because of the elevation, are winter closures for wildlife to protect wintering big game. That's been well supported too by that we know animals use it by not only observations anecdotally, but also empirical evidence. We have a lot of collar data that shows these are really important winter use areas for wildlife, especially because the development of the actual valley bottom is so extensive, where some of those animals would have historically wintered. They've got to have some places of refuge here in the mid elevation on the plateau. On the left, you'll see a closure that's actually up on the U.S. Forest Service on the west side of the Uncompahgre Plateau. That is closed for elk production. So it closes after the end of October, and then it's closed for winter because of access, but there's some restrictions on motorized use because it's a really important production area for elk. So we've worked, make everybody sick here. We've worked with our land management partners for decades and gotten some really important places protected for wildlife relevant to the time of year. And we really appreciate that collaboration, and we'll keep working on that. Additionally, our DWMs, your game wardens, comment on land use proposals from federal agencies, counties, towns, and they evaluate project by project and make recommendations and comments regarding wildlife which may be affected by those projects. Generally, it's development could be infrastructure of any kind. And your DWMs are making comments on those and advocating for wildlife every single day across the state. This work is really important. It's tough. It takes a lot of time. It's not the fun stuff of being out in the truck and doing the game warden thing, but it's critical work, and they do it every day. And it's where the breakdown, I think, is sometimes is that this is a site-by-site approach, proposal by proposal, and sometimes we don't have an overarching guide or an overarching plan that's interagency and inter-interest group to help direct development or help us direct our time and effort. And we end up spending a lot of time on these projects. So that need for that overarching plan was seen and addressed by the highest level of state government. In 2020, Governor Jared Polis signed Executive Order B 2020-008. And what this does is it acknowledges that Colorado is a really special place, that our land and our wildlife and our water are dependent on them being conserved, but also that there's this economic value to having a really special state like we do. And we're at this critical juncture where we need to act to make sure that we can have this way of life and these resources preserved, but also keep this being a world-class destination for folks to come to. It also continues that thoughtful planning and strategic investment is the way to get there. So I wanted to acknowledge that this is not the first time that somebody's had this idea. It's a great solidification of it, and it commits funds, but groups are already doing this work in Colorado and have been for several years. The executive order created the Outdoor Regional Partnerships Initiative. And it says that regional partnerships will work to eventually establish a state level vision, but a regional partnership will work in a smaller area to define a plan to help try to find that thing that we're ever seeking, which is that balance between wildlife and recreation. Here in the Ouray area, it's outside of Ouray County specifically, so we call it just the Ouray area. We applied for grant money to start the Ouray Recreation and Conservation Alliance. This is a wordy slide, but we had a lot of folks involved in bringing that together and putting that application together. So we put this application in and received $60,000 to start this new regional partnership. We're the only new coalition that was funded this last year. All of the other funding went to existing coalitions. So we're learning that it's a task to set up a new coalition. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of work, but we're here for it. And the need for it is that, like I showed earlier, this is a trailhead. Actually, the trailhead is way up the drainage. These are people parked along the road, well below the trailhead. So you can park with 1,000 of your closest friends and camp with 500 of your closest friends of people you don't know, and then march up the line of ants with another couple hundred of them. So this isn't, of course, everywhere, but this is some places where we're really seeing this impact of unchecked recreation and the damage and disturbance that occurs as a result of that. We had our first coalition kickoff meeting last fall, and it was well attended. We picked a night, we had 40 people show up. We had a really extensive email list of other people that were interested that couldn't come, that we've been keeping in the loop. But what really surprised me is the genuine excitement that people are seeing. They want this planning to occur. They want this balance to occur, and that they had so many of the same concerns that we did as the convening committee. The things that brought the convening committee together to put in the grant, these people spelled them all out on flip charts. This is one flip chart. We worked in groups and identified needs, what they wanted the coalition to address, what they thought were high priorities. And this is one snapshot of that. And it was incredible to see that what we see as land management agencies and wildlife agency is what they see too, and the concerns that they have. So really heartening to see that the time and the appetite is right for us to do this work. Right now, we're still in our infancy. We kicked off in the fall of 2021. And as I mentioned, we're starting this coalition from the ground up. We're working to define our vision, mission, and geographic scope. We're working on governance structures, and we're still identifying stakeholders constantly and inviting others to join our communications list. So as I mentioned a couple of times, we got a lot of work to do. But there's a lot of really great organizations in Colorado to learn from. The ones on this slide are not all of them in Colorado. These are just ones that were also funded through the same initiative through CPW and GoCo last year. And they were all born of different needs. Some are like the Uray area, where it's like, holy cow, we have this tremendous influx of people. We really need to find a way to advocate for wildlife and sustainable recreation in the midst of this. And some have other motivations and other needs that they were born out of. Some are county-based, one county, some are multiple counties. So these coalitions can look like a lot of different things. They serve different roles in their communities. Some have created plans that the counties have adopted. Some are just advisory committees that sit and they work with land management agencies or recreation planners to consider all of the different viewpoints of what they're planning. And the really awesome thing that I have found is that they've created all of these tools or toolkits or apps or interfaces, and they are sharing these tools. These different organizations they know what it's like to start from scratch. And so they're trying to give the next folks a tool and a little bit of a boost up, which is tremendous. So a few that we've been looking at here recently and looking at structure for our SLV Go on the right side, San Luis Valley Great Outdoors, multiple counties involved, multiple efforts to plan for long-term into the future to draw recreation as an economic driver. Envision Chafee in the center, it was more like our situation where they were just seeing some of the places that they love to death. So working to create a plan to make that more sustainable and protect what they love. And then Gunnison County STORE, the Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation, is a really great example as well for protecting the economic interests of tourism, but also doing that in a way that's not going to cause further resource damage. So as I mentioned, Chafee County, they have a really neat tool that I want to show with this group. I think y'all as wildlife enthusiasts would find this to be really cool. So I want to talk about them for just a second. Envision Chafee was born from a public effort because they saw this tremendous increase in outdoor rec tourism, faster than anybody anticipated and faster than any land managers could keep up with in managing and checking the side effects of that use. So they've created multiple tools. One of them is this community action plan. This product is a really cool summary of this community proactive effort to preserve the landscape, to improve it and to improve the recreation in the places that they love. So this outdoor recreation plan, which they've also created, was adopted by the county's planning commission. And now they're using that as one of their guiding documents in their land use planning. So these coalitions can come up with products that can be used in a variety of ways depending on the need. So I'm going to hold on this slide here for a second. This is an example of a tool that can be created through these coalition efforts. Jamin Gregg, who you've heard from tonight, he worked in Salida at the time, and he was instrumental in the Chafee County effort, the Envision effort, and working through some of these wildlife exercises. So he's offered that to us here in Montrose and other places as well. So we're looking forward to working on that. We've been asked here in Montrose, man, if you guys just could give us a map of the no-go places, like the places that are a non-starter because you're going to have too many wildlife concerns, they're places that are too important. We wouldn't even bring a proposal to the table that asked for new trails in that area or asked for a new recreation opportunity there. If we just knew what it was, we would better use our time and look at other places. This is one of the tools that we could provide that would do that. What this shows is the really important zones for wildlife. So you have this purple color. I've just pulled this out, so it's a little bit grainy, but the purple is undisturbed, highest quality habitat. And the recommendation is to strongly avoid new development of recreation opportunities or development in those areas. That's huge. And the other end of the spectrum, we have community concentration zones, especially centered around the river in this valley. You know, if you've been down there, you know that river life is a really beautiful part of the recreation there, and really beautiful opportunities to see in a new and different way. And so the recreation could be concentrated in some of these zones. That's going to be an easy pass to get a project through. So it helps you prioritize what's your habitat quality like, and what's the disturbance there, and how do we put a new proposal, where does it fall into that landscape, and is that something that we're willing to, as land managers, as county managers and planners, willing to push forward and to allow. So how is this created? This is a GIS exercise that you can put in whatever data you have, and you can leave out data that you don't have. Here they use both wildlife data and recreation data and come up with this tool. You can customize this to whatever you need. So you can tell the model, the mapping model, what you want it to include and how much weight it gets. And you can come up with the tool that represents what your needs in your community are. So I'm going to move to the next slide, and it's going to compare the recreation impacts by season. You can also, once you've got this model built, you can look by time of year. Where is recreation going to be highly disturbing, or is it going to be less disturbing? So for example, on the left, you have the production habitats. So our late winter, early spring, spring time of year, that the severity of recreation impacts on wildlife is lower where it's green and higher where it's red. Similar model, but now we're looking at winter on the right. The potential severity of recreation impacts on wildlife are going to be lower where it's green, your higher elevation, and in your winter range, your impacts are going to be much higher where it's red and orange. So again, this is just an example, but this is a really neat tool that this coalition, this Chaffee County team came up with, and it's been used, it's being adopted, and they're using it for their planning. So in addition to this wildlife model that does take some work on the back end and some computer savvy, there's also other data collection apps and tools that you can use that are available to start right now. So that's about what I wanted to cover this evening, other than what can you do if you're not on a coalition, if you're not working with folks. Do you have a coalition? How do you get started? So we're working on that here in Montrose. It's keeping us busy, but our statewide goal is to have all of the state with one of these coalitions representing them in the next several years. So funding's committed, we're going to get there. If you don't know if you have a coalition locally, ask your DWM, check in with your office. They will know if this is a thing in your area. They'll know who the players are. If a coalition's not started, maybe you can start on one. Funding is going to continuously be available through CPW and GOCO. We're really committed to making this effort happen so we can responsibly plan into the future to protect our wildlife and to create sustainable and maintain sustainable recreation opportunities. But it's an important effort, and we need folks that are willing to carry it through. And outside of the coalition thing, this is just my plug, especially with your interests as hunters and as anglers. Your local land use commenting processes are really important places for you to advocate for wildlife protections, trail planning, development, infrastructure. It's important that they hear from people that care about the resource as much as we do, what protections they think are important or other considerations. So local land use commenting is not a glorious business, but it's really important. With that, I will wrap up and I will kick it back to John. I don't know if we have time for questions. Thanks for listening.
Well said, Rachel. A really good presentation. I appreciate that. We are running short on time. The Facebook stream will stop promptly at 8 p.m. So I wanted to kick it over to Corey real quick for a last little update here on Wolves.
Thanks, John, and I'll try to hurry. I do want to leave a few minutes if we do have time for questions. So probably the number one thing I can say is our website is updated on the Wolves Stay Informed webpage. So anything that I could say most likely would be on there. Quick timeline, real fast, with some depredation that we had up near North Park. February 9th, our staff was able to go up there. We were hoping to replace a collar on an adult female, the alpha female. We ended up getting a GPS collar on a female wolf pup. Lo and behold, the next day, February 10th, U.S. District Court vacated the Fish and Wildlife Service 2020 rule delisting gray wolves across the lower 48. That returns management authority to the Fish and Wildlife Service. Real quick, we do have, I believe there's 2 positions that have been posted relating to wolf management. And I know we have a third that we're working on right now as it relates to our damage program that we're going to be filling. And then the last thing I would say, and I'll pass it over to Matt just in case he has anything else, but I would pay attention to the next Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting. I know Reed DeWalt from CPW and Lisa Reynolds from our AG office will be presenting about the federal delisting of gray wolves. And then Keystone Policy Center will also have a discussion on the reports put together by the Stakeholder Advisory Group and the Technical Working Group on livestock compensation. And real quick, if I can say thank you to Mia, Roger, the amount of time y'all put into this, the public out there that's spending your time to pay attention, any of the wildlife commissioners that are on, thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt.
Corey, I think you covered it. So yeah, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. John, if there's any short questions that you see, I think we might be able to.
Yeah, I think we're good. If we just want to get some last comments, or maybe a last question from Mia and Roger, we should be good to close it out with that.
Perfect.
I just wanted to say one comment real quick about the wolf, that it was pretty lucky that you guys collared the pup the day before the delisting, because that next day it would have been illegal to do that. So that was, I think, I consider that lucky. But I want to thank you guys also for having the caucus. I want to remind people that are watching to fill out surveys. Those really are helpful. Reach out to your DWMs. They love hearing from you. I know that. I'm a member of the Colorado Outdoor Partnership, the governor's co-op program. And thank you, Rachel, because it was great to get an update from you and for you to mention the other groups that we gave money to, because that is really cool to see. And also pay attention to the commission meetings. If you see issues that you have concern about, be sure and speak up at those. They need to hear from you as well.
Thank you, Mia.
I would say, Rachel, thanks for that presentation. I appreciate that. I think that, my feeling is recreational impacts on wildlife are one of the biggest issues facing us going forward. And with our, once again, the population increase of our state, it's only going to get more difficult. The maps were great. I think that I'm happy to see the progress that's been made so far and look forward to more progress. I think, almost every use on the ground is detrimental to wildlife, and there's not enough wildlife advocates. I know there's a few here tonight, and everybody being involved with CPW. So I think that's pretty important moving forward. Thanks for everybody's time.
Excellent. Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Mia. Thanks, everybody, for coming together. Great presentations tonight. Like I said, this will be recorded. You can go back and rewatch it on the Facebook page for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. You do not need to have an account to watch that. We'll also work on getting it posted to YouTube here over the next couple days or so you can go back and watch those just like the commission meetings. But with that, that's been our Southwest Region Sportspersons Caucus for February 2022. And we'll meet again, hopefully here in the fall with all of you folks. Thank you.
Thank you.